Fire pops in the hearth. Wood settles. Cold creeps into an old injury when the night gets quiet. I wrap my hands around a hot cup and let the warmth lie to me for a second. Here's the truth, brothers. Leaving the battlefield doesn't mean the war ends. Sometimes the silence is worse than gunfire. The safe zone is a story we tell ourselves so we can sleep. Then comes the breach. Not with explosions, not with sirens. A door opens where it shouldn't. An envelope slides where it doesn't belong. A service dog freezes, and a monster knocks on the only place that was supposed to be off limits. So I'll ask you straight. When you're backed into a corner, do you run? Or do you hold the line? Tonight's threat wasn't loud. It was greedy. It erased a name, stole a future, and thought no one would notice. Thought wrong. Pull up a chair, brothers. Sit with me by the fire. Let's talk about survival, about being the guardian when the past comes calling, and the cost of instant regret. Heat, dust, and a quiet promise. A hard Phoenix sun pressed down on the streets, and a brief desert shower left the air smelling like warm dust and wet stone. Caleb Ward parked his old pickup a half block from Haven Mesa shelter and sat for a moment with both hands resting on the steering wheel. The windshield held a thin film of grit, like the city never fully exhaled. He watched people cross the sidewalk in small, hurried groups, shoulders tucked, eyes forward. Phoenix had a way of making everyone look like they were saving water, even with their expressions. His left leg ached as he stepped out. It always did on weather shifts, even the small ones. Caleb adjusted his weight, hiding the limp out of habit, then let it show when he realized no one here needed him to pretend. Ranger jumped down after him, a 5-year-old German Shepherd with black and tan markings and a powerful, athletic build. The dog's black harness was snug across his chest, the white lettering clear and bold. Service dog, do not pet. Caleb wore the same thing he wore most days. A red and black flannel shirt over a dark tee, faded jeans, and scuffed brown work boots. He looked like a man heading to a hardware store, not someone who had spent a decade learning how to read danger from a room's silence. That was the point. He walked toward the shelter entrance with Ranger at heel. The renovated building used to be a small church, the paint tired and peeling, the windows barred without apology. A donation bin sat near the door, overflowing with clothes that smelled faintly of detergent and second chances. Caleb's phone buzzed again. Another message from the Foundation's office. Another polite reminder that this was just a routine audit. He stared at the screen until it dimmed. Routine. That word never meant routine. Not when someone said money was missing from a place that fed hungry people. Not when a volunteer had written an anonymous note about girls being pressured to sign things. Not when the complaint ended with, "Please don't tell him I told you." Caleb tucked the phone away. Ranger's ears shifted, tracking the sounds inside. The dog was quiet, but his whole body listened. A woman met them in the lobby. She was around 60, with steel gray hair pulled back into a neat bun and warm brown eyes that looked tired without being defeated. Her face held the kind of lines earned from years of listening to stories no one wanted to hear. "Mr. Ward," she asked. Caleb nodded. "Caleb is fine. I'm Marisol Alvarez," she said, offering a hand. Her grip was firm, the way people hold on when the world keeps trying to take things away. "Director here. Thank you for coming in person." "I prefer it," Caleb said. Marisol's gaze flicked to Ranger's harness and then back to Caleb's face, as if filing him under a category she recognized but didn't want to name out loud. "We've had issues," she admitted. "Missing donations, confusion with paperwork. I've tried tightening procedures, but the work moves fast and the needs don't wait." Caleb followed her down a hallway that smelled of disinfectant and coffee. A few women sat at folding tables, heads bowed over forms. Some looked up, then looked away. A toddler pushed a toy truck along the floor. the wheels clicking in a steady rhythm that sounded too much like a countdown. Caleb felt the familiar pull in his chest. It was not pity. He'd learned pity was easy and cheap. This was something heavier. Guilt. He had given money to shelters like this before. Big checks, nice letters, a photo op when someone insisted. It was easier than walking inside, easier than seeing what survival actually looked like. Marisol stopped near an open doorway. The kitchen is down there. The storeroom is on the right. Derek runs inventory. At the name, her voice changed slightly. Not fear, more like caution wrapped in professionalism. Derek Nolan, she added. He's efficient, quick with donors, knows how to talk. Caleb understood what that meant. Some people used words the way other people used lockpicks. They passed the kitchen. Heat and the smell of onions rolled into the hall. A young woman stood at a stainless steel counter, wiping it down with deliberate care. She was 18, tall and slim, with light skin and sun-warmed freckles across her nose. Her hair was dark blonde, pulled into a low knot that looked like it had been done in a hurry. She wore a faded hoodie and jeans that were slightly too short, the hem hovering above worn sneakers. She kept her eyes down, but her shoulders were held straight, like she refused to fold completely. Ranger slowed. Not a lunge, not a bark, just a subtle pause, one paw hovering for a breath as his amber eyes settled on the girl. Caleb stopped with him. The girl glanced up, startled, then quickly looked away as if eye contact might cost her something. Caleb caught the small details anyway. The tension in her jaw, the way her hands kept moving, as if stillness was dangerous. The quiet self-control of someone who had learned that asking for anything invited punishment. Marisol lowered her voice. That's Sophie Miller. She came in 2 weeks ago. Keeps to herself, works every shift offered, doesn't complain. Caleb watched Sophie for another moment. Ranger's tail stayed neutral. His posture wasn't alarmed. It was attentive, almost protective. Caleb felt an old instinct rise, the one that never really left him. In the teams, he had learned to trust what he saw before he trusted what he was told. What's her situation? Caleb asked. Marisol hesitated, as if choosing words carefully. Recently turned 18. No stable family. She says she's trying to get her documents in order and figure out school. She had an envelope with papers when she arrived. Derek told her he could help her organize it. Caleb's eyes narrowed slightly. He took it. Marisol didn't defend the choice. He said it was safer in the office. I didn't like it, but Sophie didn't protest. She rarely protests anything. That landed like a stone in Caleb's stomach. He kept walking, Marisol leading, Ranger close. They reached the storeroom. The door opened to neatly stacked boxes, labeled with thick marker. Hygiene kits, winter coats, canned food. Everything looked orderly, almost too orderly, like a display. A man turned from the shelves with a practiced smile. Derek Nolan was in his late 30s, average height, lean, with short, dark hair combed neatly, and a clean polo shirt that didn't match the dusty work around him. His eyes were bright and quick, the kind that measured people in fractions of a second. Caleb Ward, Derek said, extending a hand. Heard you might stop by. Happy to show you anything you need. Caleb didn't take the hand right away. He nodded instead, calm. I'm here to understand the process. Derek's smile held. Of course. We run a tight ship. His gaze drifted toward Ranger. Beautiful dog. I've always... No, Caleb said softly. The word was quiet, but it cut clean. Derek chuckled, as if he... Right. Service dog. I respect. Caleb stepped deeper into the room, scanning labels. Placement. His mind did what it always did. It mapped exits. It noted blind spots. It listened for what didn't fit. On a small table near the back, half covered by a clipboard, lay a yellow envelope with a name written in dark ink. Sophie Miller. Derek moved quickly, almost casually, sliding it off the table and into a drawer with a smooth motion that might have fooled someone who wasn't looking for it. Caleb was looking. A familiar cold settled behind Caleb's ribs. Not rage. Not yet. More like the moment before a storm breaks, when the air goes still and everything waits. He met Derek's eyes. "What's in the envelope?" Derek blinked once, then smiled wider. "Just intake paperwork. Nothing dramatic." Caleb kept his voice even. "Paperwork belongs to the person who brought it." Derek's smile tightened at the corners, then loosened again. Rehearsed. "We keep important items secure. Girls lose things. People steal. We protect them." Caleb thought of Sophie's straight shoulders and careful hands. He thought of Marisol's tired eyes. He thought of the anonymous note that ended with fear. He nodded once, as if accepting the explanation. But inside, something had already shifted. He had seen the movement. He had heard the story. And Ranger had paused for a reason. Caleb glanced down at the dog. Ranger looked back up, steady and silent. Caleb knew that look. It meant, pay attention. Something is wrong. And Caleb had promised himself long ago that when he saw wrong, he wouldn't walk past it. Paperwork and pressure. Late afternoon heat clung to Phoenix like a second skin. The sky bleached pale as shadows stretched long across the shelter courtyard. Caleb Ward leaned against the concrete wall near the side entrance, arms folded over his red and black flannel. The fabric was worn soft from years of use, the kind of shirt a man kept not for style but for familiarity. Ranger lay at his feet, black and tan body relaxed but alert, chin resting on crossed paws, amber eyes tracking every movement within range. Caleb had learned long ago that waiting was not the same as doing nothing. Inside the shelter, the rhythm of the afternoon had settled. Dishes clinked. A volunteer laughed too loudly at something small. Life continued, thin but stubborn. Caleb listened to it all, letting his thoughts move where his feet could not yet go. The envelope kept replaying in his mind, not just that Derek had taken it, but how. Too smooth, too practiced, like a man who had done it before and never been questioned. Marisol Alvarez approached quietly, up close. The years showed more clearly. Her posture was straight, but her shoulders carried the weight of too many compromises. She held a clipboard against her chest like a shield. "I spoke with Sophie," she said softly. "She's nervous." Caleb nodded. "That makes sense." She says Derek told her the envelope contained forms that could delay her stay if they weren't processed correctly. Marisol's mouth tightened. He used the word compliance. Caleb felt a flicker of anger, sharp and controlled. Compliance was a word meant for rules, not people. "Did she sign anything?" he asked. Marisol hesitated. "She thinks so. She didn't get a copy." Ranger's ears shifted at the change in tone. Caleb rested a hand briefly on the dog's shoulder, grounding himself as much as Ranger. "Can I speak with her?" Caleb asked. Marisol studied him for a moment, not with suspicion, with hope edged by fear. "I'll bring her to the counseling room. She trusts dogs more than people." That tracked. The counseling room was small and smelled faintly of lavender cleaner. 2 chairs, a low table, a window that looked out onto a sun-cracked parking lot. Sophie sat stiffly in one chair, hands folded so tightly her knuckles were pale. Up close, Caleb could see how young she really was, the faint shadow under her eyes, the way she kept her feet planted, ready to stand if needed. She looked at Ranger first. "It's okay," Caleb said gently. "He won't touch you unless you want him to." Ranger stayed where he was, only his tail giving one slow thump against the floor. Sophie let out a breath she might not have realized she was holding. Caleb didn't sit right away. He stayed standing, giving her, "I'm not here to get you in trouble," he said. "And I'm not here to make decisions for you." Her eyes flicked up, then down again. "That's what—" "I know," Caleb replied. "That's why I'm saying something different. I'm here because I saw something that didn't feel right." Sophie swallowed. Her voice, when it came, was quiet but steady. "I don't want problems. I just need to stay." Caleb felt that sentence settle into his bones. He had heard versions of it in war zones and courtrooms, spoken by people who believed survival required silence. "Tell me about the envelope," he said. She hesitated. then nodded. It had my school papers, a letter about a grant, and my ID application. Derek said he could help make sure everything went through faster. What did he ask you to sign? Sophie closed her eyes briefly, searching memory. He said it was a confirmation that the shelter could receive funds on my behalf. Temporary, until I had a bank account. Caleb kept his expression neutral. Inside, pieces were already locking together. Did he explain what "on your behalf" meant? She shook her head. He said it was normal, that I was lucky they were willing to help me. Lucky, another word used like a leash. Caleb glanced at Ranger. The dog had shifted closer to Sophie, close enough that she could feel the warmth without being crowded. Ranger's presence was calm, deliberate. Protective without pressure. Has Derek ever made you feel rushed? Caleb asked. Or afraid that if you didn't cooperate, you'd lose your place here? Sophie's fingers tightened. He said there were rules. That space was limited, that if paperwork wasn't clean, they'd have to prioritize others. Caleb exhaled slowly through his nose. He knew that tactic well. Create scarcity. Add urgency. Remove choice. Thank you for telling me, he said. You didn't do anything wrong. Her eyes filled, but she didn't cry. She nodded once, sharply, like she needed the motion to stay upright. A knock came at the door. Derek Nolan leaned in without waiting for an answer. In daylight, his polished appearance looked almost out of place against the worn walls. He smiled easily, hands in his pockets. Everything all right in here? He asked. His gaze lingered on Sophie just a fraction too long. Caleb turned to face him fully. The room seemed smaller with the two men in it. We're talking, Caleb said. You can wait. Derek chuckled. No need to get territorial. I was just checking on our guest. Sophie flinched at the word. Caleb stepped slightly, placing himself between Derek and Sophie without making it obvious. Ranger rose smoothly to a sit, body aligned with Caleb's leg, eyes fixed on Derek. Derek noticed. His smile wavered, then reset. Service dogs make people nervous, he said lightly. You might want to keep him outside. Caleb's voice was calm. He's exactly where he needs to be. Derek's jaw tightened. Look, Caleb, I handle intake. That includes documents. You start questioning my process. It undermines trust. Caleb met his eyes. Trust doesn't come from hiding paperwork. The silence stretched. Derek glanced at Sophie again, calculating. Did I do something wrong? He asked her directly. Sophie froze. The room held its breath. Caleb saw it then. The weight Derek carried into every interaction. The way he positioned himself as authority. The way Sophie shrank, conditioned to believe resistance had consequences. She doesn't owe you an answer, Caleb said. Derek's smile disappeared completely this time. You're overstepping. Maybe, Caleb replied. Or maybe I'm stepping exactly where someone should have stepped earlier. Marisol appeared in the doorway, her expression firm now. Derek, I need you in the office. Derek looked between them, annoyance flashing hot and quick. We'll talk later, he said to Sophie, his tone sharp despite the words. Caleb felt Ranger tense beneath his hand. Derek left. The room felt lighter once the door closed. Sophie's shoulders sagged. Did I mess things up? She whispered. Caleb shook his head. No. You just told the truth. As they stepped back into the hall, Caleb's phone buzzed. A message from Brian Hayes lit the screen. Running preliminary checks now. Something's off. I'll call soon. Caleb stared at the words until the screen dimmed. He looked down at Ranger. Good catch, he murmured. Ranger's tail thumped once. Caleb knew then that this was no longer a routine audit. Someone had crossed a line, and lines, once crossed, had consequences. Lines crossed. The evening heat refused to fade. Even as the sun slipped low and painted the Phoenix sky in dull copper and ash. Caleb Ward stood near the shelter's side exit. Red and black flannel darkened slightly with sweat. His posture loose but ready. Ranger stayed close at heel, the German Shepherd's black harness catching the last light. Service dog. Do not pet. The words were more than a warning. They were a boundary. Caleb's phone buzzed again in his pocket. He didn't answer right away. Inside the building, tension had shifted. It was subtle, the way air changes before a storm breaks. Voices were quieter, footsteps more careful. Derek Nolan had not returned to the counseling wing after being called into the office, but his presence lingered anyway, like a smell that wouldn't clear. Caleb checked the time, then finally pulled out his phone. Brian Hayes' name filled the screen. Caleb answered. "Talk to me." Brian's voice came through low and clipped. "All business. I ran preliminary checks on the foundation transfers tied to Haven Mesa. It's not clean." Caleb turned slightly, eyes scanning the parking lot without really seeing it. "How bad?" "Bad enough that it's not accidental," Brian said. "Small deposits routed through a temporary holding account, then redirected. The pattern points to someone with intake access, someone who knows which accounts won't be questioned right away." Caleb didn't need the names said out loud. Brian continued. "The most recent transfer lines up with a grant issued 2 weeks ago. The beneficiary name matches Sophie Miller, but the receiving account was changed within hours." Caleb felt his jaw tighten. He pictured Sophie's careful hands, the way she'd said she didn't want problems. He pictured Derek's smile. "Can you trace where it went?" Caleb asked. "Right now." "I already am," Brian replied. "Give me 30 minutes. I'll have something solid." Caleb ended the call and slipped the phone back into his pocket. He didn't move. Ranger shifted his weight, ears rotating, reading the environment the way Caleb read people. A volunteer exited the back door carrying trash, startled slightly when she saw them. Caleb nodded politely. Ranger stayed still. Caleb had learned in the teams that when lines were crossed, hesitation costs lives. But this wasn't a battlefield. It was messier, slower, and the wrong move could hurt the very person he was trying to protect. Marisol Alvarez stepped outside, closing the door behind her. In the fading light, her expression had hardened. Not into anger, into resolve. "He's packing up," she said. "Derek. He claims he has another shift across town. I told him to leave his keys." Caleb's eyes narrowed. "Did he?" After arguing, Marisol said. "Yes, but he was angry, and he kept asking about Sophie." Caleb felt something settle in his chest. Cold, certain. "Where is Sophie now?" "In the kitchen," Marisol said. "Helping clean. I told her to stay near staff." Caleb nodded once. "Good." A sudden sound cut through the quiet. A sharp bang from inside. Raised voices. The back door burst open. Derek Nolan stepped out fast, jacket slung over one shoulder, face flushed. In the artificial light, his clean-cut look had cracked. His eyes darted, calculating exits. He stopped when he saw Caleb and Ranger. "Move," Derek snapped, trying to brush past. Caleb didn't step aside. "This is between me and management," Derek said. "You're not a cop." "Number," Caleb replied evenly. "But I know when someone's running." Derek laughed, high and brittle. "You don't know anything. You think you can walk in here with a dog and start playing hero." Ranger rose to stand, body aligned with Caleb's leg. No growl, no bark, just presence. Derek's gaze flicked to the harness, then away. "Control your animal." Caleb took a step closer. Not aggressive, just enough to shrink the space Derek thought he owned. "You crossed a line," Caleb said, "and now you're trying to leave before it catches up to you." Derek's expression twisted. "I helped that girl. Without me, she'd still be on the street." The lie came easily, too easily. Caleb thought of Sophie again, the way she'd asked if she'd messed things up just by telling the truth. Something inside him hardened. Before he could respond, Sophie appeared in the doorway behind Derek. She froze when she saw them face to face, her body reacting before her mind caught up. Derek turned, eyes locking on her. "Sophie," he said, voice suddenly smooth. "We need to talk." There was a misunderstanding. Sophie took a half step back. Ranger moved. Not fast, not violent. He simply stepped between Sophie and Derek. Broad chest blocking the path. Head level. Eyes fixed. Derek raised his hands. "Get this dog away from me." Caleb didn't raise his voice. "Back up." Derek ignored him. He reached out, fingers brushing the edge of Ranger's harness. Everything happened in a breath. Ranger snapped his head forward, teeth bared inches from Derek's wrist. A sharp warning without contact. Derek yelped and stumbled back, tripping over his own feet. Caleb was on him instantly. Years of muscle memory took over. Caleb hooked Derek's arm, twisted, and guided him down, controlling the fall despite the weakness in his left leg. Derek hit the ground hard, air driven from his lungs. "Don't," Caleb said quietly, pinning him just enough. "Make this worse." Marisol shouted for someone to call the police. A volunteer fumbled with a phone. Derek struggled, panic breaking through his arrogance. "You can't do this. I didn't steal anything." Caleb leaned closer, his voice low enough that only Derek could hear. "If you didn't, you wouldn't be running." Sirens sounded in the distance, growing louder. Caleb released pressure but stayed close. Ranger remained standing, a solid wall between Sophie and the chaos. Sophie watched, trembling, fear, relief, and guilt tangled in her expression. Caleb caught her eye. "This isn't on you," he said firmly. "None of it." Derek was hauled to his feet as police arrived, his protest spilling out in angry bursts. The officers listened. They looked at the scene. They looked at Caleb's steady posture, Ranger's harness, Marisol's shaken but resolute stance. Caleb felt his phone buzz again. Brian's message flashed on the screen. Confirmed. Funds misdirected. Account under Nolan's control. Caleb closed his eyes for a brief second. The line had been crossed, and now the cost was coming due. The name that would not stay buried. Night settled over Phoenix with lingering heat, the air heavy and unmoving, as streetlights hummed and cast pale halos on cracked pavement. Caleb Ward sat on a low concrete barrier outside the shelter. Red and black flannel sleeves rolled to the forearms. Ranger lay at his feet, black and tan coat dark against the ground. Harness lettering still stark in the light. "Service dog. Do not pet." The words felt like an anchor in a night that refused to cool. Police lights had long since faded down the street. Derek Nolan was gone, taken with questions and handcuffs, and the kind of anger that burned hot and fast. The shelter exhaled, returning to its fragile routine. Dishes, forms, quiet voices. Survival. Caleb stared at the dark horizon and felt the familiar ache in his left leg deepen. It wasn't the injury. It was the waiting. He had learned to sit with uncertainty in places where the cost of guessing wrong was blood. This felt different, personal, closer to the bone. Sophie Miller sat on the steps a few feet away, knees drawn up, hands wrapped around a paper cup of water she hadn't touched. Under the yellow light, she looked younger than 18, the hard edges of caution softened by exhaustion. She kept her gaze fixed ahead, as if the night might ask something of her if she looked away. Marisol Alvarez moved in and out of the doorway, directing staff with quiet authority. Her voice was calm, but her hands shook slightly when she thought no one was watching. Caleb rose and crossed the short distance to Sophie, careful not to crowd her. Ranger followed and settled beside her, close enough that his warmth reached her through the thin fabric of her hoodie. "You did well," Caleb said. Sophie's mouth twitched. "I didn't do anything." "That's not true," Caleb replied. "You stayed honest when it would have been easier to stay quiet." She nodded once, then looked down. "I keep thinking they'll change their minds, that I'll have to leave." Caleb felt that sentence echo against old walls in his mind. "That's not happening tonight." She looked up then, searching his face. "How can you be sure?" "Because I'm still here," he said simply. His phone vibrated in his pocket. Caleb glanced at the screen and stepped a few paces away, turning his back to give Sophie space. Brian Hayes' message was brief. "I pulled deeper records. There's more. Call me." Caleb dialed. Brian answered immediately. "I didn't want to text this," he said. "It's sensitive." "Talk," Caleb said. "There's a name tied to Sophie's old intake records." Brian continued. "Not Derek's. A prior contact, emergency field from years ago. It was buried under incomplete entries." Caleb's jaw tightened. "What name?" "Daniel Miller." The night seemed to tilt. Caleb closed his eyes. He saw dust and sun glare, heard rotor wash, felt the weight of a body he couldn't keep. "How sure are you?" Caleb asked. "Enough that I triple-checked," Brian said. "Same Daniel Miller. Navy. Deceased. KIA. The timeline matches. There's a trail that leads back to New Mexico. Old hospital records. Birth documentation that never fully closed." Caleb said nothing. Brian filled the silence carefully. "Caleb, if this is what I think it is, Sophie isn't just a victim of fraud. She's the child of a man who never got the chance to come home." Caleb ended the call and stood there, the phone heavy in his hand. Ranger lifted his head, sensing the shift. Caleb rested his palm briefly on the dog's neck, grounding himself. Daniel Miller had been a good man. Not loud, not flashy, steady. The kind who carried extra weight so others didn't have to. Caleb had promised him once, half shouting over noise and chaos, that if anything happened, he'd find Daniel's family. Then life had moved on. Funerals, transfers, years that stacked on top of each other, until promises felt like artifacts. Caleb turned back to Sophie. She watched him closely now, something like fear returning to her eyes. "Did I do something wrong?" "Number," Caleb said. He sat beside her, leaving space between them. "I learned something, and I need to ask you a question." Her shoulders stiffened. "Okay. Did anyone ever talk to you about your father?" Caleb asked gently. "About his name?" Sophie's brow furrowed. "They said he left, that he didn't want to be found." Her voice dropped. "They said I should stop asking." Caleb nodded slowly. "Do you know the name Daniel Miller?" Her breath caught. "That was on one paper," she said after a moment. "A nurse wrote it when I was little. It got crossed out later." Caleb felt the weight of that erasure. A life crossed out with a pen. "I served with a man named Daniel Miller," Caleb said. "A long time ago." Sophie stared at him. "You knew him?" "Yes." Her hands tightened around the cup. "What kind of man was he?" Caleb didn't answer right away. "He chose truth over comfort. He was brave," he said. "He showed up. He didn't leave people behind." Sophie swallowed hard. "Then why did he leave me?" Caleb turned to face her fully. "He didn't." The word landed between them. "Fragile and powerful," Caleb explained carefully. "Not the violence, not the details that could scar. Just enough. Service, loss. A man who never made it back. A system that failed to close the loop." Sophie's face folded inward, emotions moving fast. Shock, grief, anger, something like relief. "He didn't abandon me," she whispered. "No," Caleb said. "He didn't." Tears slipped free then, silent. Unapologetic, Ranger shifted closer, resting his chin gently on Sophie's knee without touching skin. She didn't pull away. Marisol watched from the doorway, understanding dawning on her face without being told. Caleb felt the past press in on him, guilt for the promise unkept, gratitude for the chance to keep it now. "There are records in New Mexico," Caleb said. "They can help confirm everything. If you want, I can go with you." Sophie wiped her face with the heel of her hand. "Why would you do that?" Caleb's voice was steady. "Because your father was my brother in every way that mattered, and because no one should have their name taken from them." She nodded slowly. "I want to know," she said, "even if it hurts." Caleb stood, the decision settling into place. Ranger rose with him, ready. The line Derek had crossed had opened something much deeper. Not just theft, erasure. Caleb looked at Sophie and felt the promise surface again. Older now, heavier. This time, he would not let it fade. What was taken? What was returned? Morning light cut across the New Mexico desert, pale and cool, lifting slowly from red earth, as a thin wind carried the scent of sage and dust. Caleb Ward parked beside a low county building that looked older than its records. He stepped out, red and black flannel catching the breeze, boots crunching on gravel. His left leg protested on the uneven ground, a familiar reminder that some things healed crooked and stayed that way. Ranger exited after him, black and tan coat sleek, harness snug and clear. "Service dog. Do not pet." The The words felt steady, like a promise kept. Sophie stood a few steps behind, hands tucked into the sleeves of a borrowed jacket. She looked smaller here, dwarfed by open space and quiet. The desert had a way of doing that. It stripped away noise and left people with what they carried inside. They went in together. The records office smelled of paper and time. A woman at the counter looked up from her computer. She was in her late 40s, hair pulled back, eyes kind but efficient. Her name tag read Linda Perez. Her voice was calm, practiced. She had helped people find answers before, and she knew some answers changed lives. "Can I help you?" Linda asked. Caleb explained simply. No drama, no accusations. A search for confirmation. Linda nodded and took the information, fingers moving across keys with quiet precision. "Some files from that period were scanned late," she said. "Others were misindexed. It may take a few minutes." Sophie nodded, eyes fixed on the counter as if it might move. They waited. Ranger lay at Caleb's feet, head up, watching the room. Caleb watched Sophie instead. Her breathing was shallow. She held herself like someone braced for bad weather, expecting the sky to break. Caleb thought of Daniel Miller again, of the man's laugh, quick and rare, of the way Daniel checked his gear twice, not for himself, but for everyone else, of the promise spoken loud enough to be heard over chaos. Linda returned with a folder. She set it down gently, as if weight mattered. "We found it," she said. Sophie's fingers trembled. Linda opened the folder and turned it so Sophie could see. "Birth record," she said. Father listed as Daniel Miller. Status noted as deceased. The amendment that crossed out the name was filed improperly. It never should have been accepted. Sophie stared. The words blurred, then sharpened. "It's real," Linda said softly. "I'm sorry it took this long." Sophie pressed her lips together, a soundless breath leaving her. She nodded once, like a person acknowledging a truth too big to argue with. Caleb felt something release in his chest. Not relief. Resolution. They thanked Linda and stepped back into the open air. The sun had climbed higher, warming the ground. Sophie walked a few paces ahead, then stopped. She turned, eyes bright and wet, and looked at Caleb. "He didn't leave me," she said. "No," Caleb replied. "He didn't." They drove back in silence, the kind that didn't need filling. When they reached Phoenix, the city felt louder, sharper. Sirens, engines, heat. The hearing took place 2 weeks later. The room was small, too small for the consequences being weighed. Derek Nolan sat at the table, suit ill-fitting, confidence gone. His hair was still neat, but his eyes darted, searching for angles that no longer existed. Caleb sat behind Sophie. Ranger lay at his feet, unmoving. The evidence was simple. Transfers traced. Signatures matched. Authority abused. Derek's lawyer spoke, words careful and thin. Derek spoke once, voice tight, claiming confusion. The judge listened, expression unreadable. When the decision came, it was quick. Guilty. Derek's shoulders sagged. The instant regret had arrived earlier, but this was the moment it settled in his bones. Consequences were not loud. They were final. Outside, Sophie breathed deeply, as if testing a new kind of air. "I thought I'd feel angry," she said, "but I just feel done." Caleb nodded. "That's normal." They returned to Haven Mesa's shelter that evening. Marisol Alvarez met them at the door, relief plain on her face. "You're welcome here," she told Sophie, "as long as you need." Sophie smiled, small but real. "Thank you." In the weeks that followed, things changed in measured ways. Accounts were secured, oversight tightened, trust rebuilt slowly, brick by brick. Sophie enrolled in classes at a community college. Paperwork filled out correctly this time. She studied at a corner table in the evenings, Ranger sometimes resting nearby, a quiet sentinel. One night, she asked Caleb about Daniel, about the things a file couldn't say. Caleb told her the good parts, the steady parts, the man who showed up. Sophie listened, eyes shining. I think I got that from him, she said. Showing up, Caleb smiled. On a Sunday morning, Sophie asked to visit the desert again. They drove out beyond the city, where the land opened wide. She carried a small stone she'd picked up near the records office. She knelt and placed it gently on the ground. No speech, no ceremony, just acknowledgement. Caleb stood back, flannel tugged by wind, Ranger at his side. Sophie rose and looked at Caleb. Thank you, she said, for not letting my name disappear. Caleb answered with truth. Thank you for trusting me enough to find it. As they walked back to the truck, Caleb felt the past settle into its place. Not erased, not forgotten, integrated. The line Derek crossed had cost him everything he thought he could take. What he stole was returned. What he erased was restored. And a promise, long delayed, was finally kept. Sometimes the miracle does not arrive as thunder or light. Sometimes it comes quietly, in the form of truth finally revealed, a wrong made right, or a promise kept long after it was spoken. Faith works that way. God does not rush, but he does not forget. What is hidden is seen. What is taken is returned. What is broken can still be restored. In everyday life, many people carry silent burdens. Papers lost, names erased, trust misplaced. Yet this story reminds us that no life is invisible to God. Even when systems fail and people choose greed, justice still has a path. It may come through unexpected hands, but it comes with purpose. If this story touched your heart, share it with someone who needs hope today. Leave a comment and tell us what this story meant to you. Subscribe to the channel so more stories like this can reach those who need them. May God bless you, protect you, and guide your steps.